He looked straight at a room full of neighbors and said, "You don't need to see every line." The funny thing was, by then I had already seen every line. I had seen the pool invoices for repairs that never happened, the landscaping bills for dead flower beds, the reserve transfers that circled back out within 48 hours, and the management company check signed by a treasurer whose own family owned the company. He thought a retired man on a fixed income would get tired, embarrassed, or scared. He thought a lying letter would make me sit down. Instead, 91 homeowners watched him learn that a budget is not a magic trick. It's a trail. And if you follow it patiently enough, it takes you right to the person holding the shovel. But to understand how one sentence at an HOA meeting turned into restitution, a recall, and a criminal referral, I have to go back to the day I moved into Maple Ridge Estates. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, especially if you've ever had to deal with an HOA board that forgot it worked for the homeowners. A quick note before I start. Some details have been changed for privacy and storytelling, but the emotions at the heart of this are real. Now let me take you back to the room where he said the line that finished him. The meeting was in the clubhouse, which sounds nicer than it was. The clubhouse at Maple Ridge had beige tile, a soda machine that ate quarters, and a long folding table where the board sat like they were presiding over Congress instead of a subdivision, with 312 homes, one broken pool, and a retention pond that smelled like wet cardboard in July. That night, every chair was full. People stood along the back wall. Somebody had dragged in 2 plastic patio chairs from outside, and they made that hollow scraping sound every time anyone shifted. I was in the second row with a binder on my lap. Not a dramatic binder. Just an old black 3-ring binder I had used for tax documents when I was still working. The plastic cover was cracked near the spine. The label on the front said, "Maple Ridge, 2024. At the board table, our treasurer, Victor Hale, had his hands folded over a yellow legal pad. Victor was a big man in a navy golf shirt, the kind with a tiny embroidered logo over the heart. He wore a watch that looked expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. Beside him sat the board president, Marlene Price, silver hair sprayed into a helmet and reading glasses on a chain. Marlene always spoke first, even when someone else had been asked a question. Especially then. I had just asked Victor to explain why $38,600 had been paid to Ridgeway Community Management in the same month the pool contractor sent us a cancellation notice for non-payment. He smiled at me, not a friendly smile. The thin one people use when they think the room belongs to them. "Gerald," he said, "you've made your point. But the membership doesn't need to see every line. That's why they elected us, to handle the details." A few people shifted behind me. I heard somebody whisper, "There it is." I looked down at the binder. Page 1 was the statute. Page 2 was my certified inspection request. Page 3 was the bank statement showing the payment. Page 4 was the state business filing for Ridgeway Community Management, listing the registered agent as Victor's brother-in-law. I did not say any of that yet. I just looked back up at him and thought, you should not have said that out loud. Maple Ridge Estates was supposed to be my quiet landing place. That was the phrase my daughter used. "Dad, you need a quiet landing place." I was 68 when I bought the house, 2 years retired from a state auditor's office, 1 year widowed, and about 6 months into learning that grief has a way of making even grocery shopping feel like a field trip to a country where you don't speak the language. My wife, Ellen, had been the social one. She knew neighbors by name before the moving truck finished backing in. She remembered birthdays. She brought soup when someone had surgery. I was the man who alphabetized warranties and kept appliance manuals in labeled folders. We worked because she opened doors and I made sure the hinges stayed oiled. After she died, the house we had lived in for 31 years felt too large and too loud. Every room had a memory in it. The kitchen still had her little ceramic spoon rest by the stove. The hallway still had the scuff mark from when we moved our daughter's dresser in 1994. I could keep living there, but I wasn't really living. I was maintaining a museum, so I sold it. I put what I could not part with into storage, gave my daughter the dining table, and bought a 2-bedroom ranch in Maple Ridge. It had a small front porch, a maple tree that dropped helicopter seeds all over the driveway, and a back patio just big enough for a chair and a potted tomato plant. The HOA dues were $265 a month, which was not nothing on my pension, but the listing said the community included pool access, landscaping of common areas, walking trails, and clubhouse maintenance. I read the governing documents before I made the offer. That is what auditors do. We are very exciting at parties. The covenants were fairly standard. No boats in driveways, no neon paint, no short-term rentals, no sheds without approval. The bylaws required annual budgets, open meetings, member inspection rights, and a reserve study every 3 years. There was even a paragraph that said records had to be made available to members within 10 business days after a written request, subject to reasonable copying costs. I noticed that paragraph because I had spent almost 4 decades noticing paragraphs like that. Most people skip them. Most boards hope people skip them. At closing, the seller told me Maple Ridge was well-run if a little strict. That sounded fine to me. A little strict can be useful. It keeps the guy on the corner from parking a rusted box truck across 3 lawns. It keeps the common areas from becoming nobody's problem. Rules are not automatically bad. Bad people hiding behind rules are the problem. I met Marlene Price my second morning there. I was carrying flattened moving boxes to the curb when a white SUV rolled slowly past my driveway, stopped, reversed, and stopped again. The driver's window slid down. Marlene leaned across the passenger seat and looked at the boxes like they had insulted her mother. "Trash pickup is Friday," she said. "Good morning," I said. She blinked as if the greeting had not been on the agenda. "Bulk cardboard needs to be broken down and bundled. Twine, not tape." I looked at the boxes in my hands. They were broken down, but they were not bundled. "I'll take care of it," I said. "We try to maintain standards here. I'm Marlene Price, board president." "Gerald Whitaker," I said. "New at 118 Sycamore." "I know. Welcome to Maple Ridge." She said welcome the way a customs officer says step aside. That same afternoon, I met Victor. He was standing near the clubhouse with a clipboard while 2 landscapers loaded a mower onto a trailer. I had walked over to look at the pool, mostly because the brochure showed blue water and 2 red umbrellas, and I thought maybe swimming would be good for my back. The pool was closed. A chain looped through the gate. A paper sign taped inside the fence said, "Temporarily closed for pump repair." The paper had curled at the edges from rain. Victor saw me reading it. "New guy," he said. "Gerald." "Victor Hale, treasurer. Pool's down for a bit. Nothing serious. Parts are delayed. You know how supply chains are." This was in May. People had been saying supply chains for so long by then that it had become a spell you could cast over anything you did not want to explain. "Any estimate?" I asked. "Couple weeks? Maybe 3. He tapped the clipboard against his thigh. "You retired?" "Recently." "Good for you. What did you do?" "Auditing. State office." His face did not change much, but something behind his eyes paused. "Taxes?" he asked. "Mostly municipal grants and special districts. Some procurement, some compliance." "Sounds thrilling." It had its moments. He laughed once, short and flat, and looked back at the landscapers. "Well, around here we try not to drown volunteers in paperwork. Board's been doing this a long time. You'll see." At the time, I thought he was making conversation. Later, I realized he had been testing the lock on a door. For the first few weeks, I tried to be normal. I unpacked. I lined the kitchen cabinets with that rubber matting Ellen used to buy. I planted 2 tomatoes and 1 basil in ceramic pots. I walked the neighborhood in the evenings, nodding to people whose names I did not know yet. I paid my first month's dues by automatic withdrawal because the welcome packet said there was a $25 fee for checks after the grace period. I also started noticing small things. The landscaping company came every Tuesday morning, but only to mow the strips nearest the entrance. The flower beds by the clubhouse had more weeds than flowers. The walking trail lights flickered at night. The pool stayed closed past Memorial Day, then past Father's Day, then past the 4th of July. The clubhouse roof had a brown water stain spreading above the bulletin board where notices were pinned. None of that proved anything. Deferred maintenance happens. Vendors get behind. Volunteers get tired. I had seen enough public agencies to know that incompetence can look a lot like fraud from a distance. Then the dues increase notice arrived. It came in a white envelope with the Maple Ridge logo printed in green at the top. Starting September 1st, monthly assessments would increase from $265 to $345. The letter cited rising costs, reserve obligations, and expanded management services. It was signed by Marlene and Victor. I read it once at the kitchen table. Then I read it again with a pen in my hand. Rising costs, maybe. Reserve obligations, perhaps. Expanded management services I did not remember voting for. The annual budget attached to the letter was 1 page. It had categories like landscaping, pool, insurance, legal, management, administrative, reserve contribution. No vendor names. No year-over-year comparison. No beginning and ending reserve balances. Just numbers rounded to the nearest hundred. Management had jumped from $42,000 to $118,000. I sat there with the letter under my hand, listening to the refrigerator hum, and felt the old part of my brain wake up. Not the angry part, the part that starts asking where a number came from. At the next board meeting, I went mostly to listen. There were maybe 18 homeowners in the clubhouse. Marlene sat at the center of the table, Victor to her right, and 3 other board members arranged like supporting actors. One was a retired dentist named Paul. One was a younger man named Nathan, who seemed to be responsible for architectural requests. The last was a woman named Tessa, who took minutes and rarely looked up. Marlene opened with the pledge, then moved through the agenda at a speed that suggested questions were a form of vandalism. When she reached the budget, a woman in the front row raised her hand. "Is the pool going to open this summer?" she asked. Marlene smiled without showing teeth. "We're working closely with management on that." "But it's July." "We're all aware of the calendar, Mrs. Alvarez." The woman sat back. I learned later her name was Rosa Alvarez, and she had bought in Maple Ridge partly because her grandson used a wheelchair, and the pool was one of the few places he could move without pain. A man near the back asked why dues were going up when services were going down. Victor took that one. "Costs are up everywhere," he said. "Insurance alone is a nightmare. If you own a home, you know that." "Can we see the insurance bids?" the man asked. Victor gave a small laugh. "We're not going to bring every invoice and bid to a member meeting. That's not practical." I raised my hand. Marlene looked at me as if she had hoped I was just scratching my head. "Gerald Whitaker, 118 Sycamore," I said. "The budget shows management expenses nearly tripling. What expanded services are included?" Victor leaned back. "Portfolio management, vendor coordination, compliance support, financial administration." "Who is the management company?" "Ridgeway Community Management." "Were they competitively bid?" The room changed a little. Not much. Just enough that I could hear the air conditioner kick on. Marlene said, Mr. Whitaker, procurement details are handled by the board. I understand. I'm asking whether the contract was bid. Victor tapped his pen on the table. We used our discretion. Ridgeway knows this community. They gave us the best package. And the contract is available for member inspection? Marlene's smile disappeared. This is not a deposition. A couple people chuckled, because people laugh when they are nervous and do not want to be next. I nodded. No, ma'am, it's a board meeting. I'm just asking. Then submit your question in writing, she said. Next item. That was the first stonewall. It was almost polite. I went home and did what I always do. I made a folder. The next morning, I wrote a short email to the board address. I asked for the Ridgeway contract, year-to-date financial statements, bank statements for operating and reserve accounts, invoices paid to Ridgeway for the previous 12 months, pool repair invoices, landscaping invoices, and the current reserve schedule. I cited the section of the bylaws that allowed inspection. I attached a PDF copy of the relevant paragraph because I have learned that people ignore words less easily when you put them right under their nose. I kept the tone boring. Boring is underrated. Boring gives people fewer places to grab you. The response came 3 days later from Marlene. Mr. Whitaker, the board provides all required financial summaries annually. Detailed internal records contain confidential vendor information and are not appropriate for general distribution. Please refer to the approved budget mailed to all members. I read that sentence 3 times. Wow. Confidential vendor information in an HOA paid for by homeowner dues. I replied with the state statute. Not just the bylaws this time. I quoted the part that said, association records, including accounting records, contracts, and bank statements, had to be made reasonably available for inspection by members. I offered 3 dates. I said I was willing to inspect in person and pay reasonable copying costs. Victor replied from his personal email, which was the first careless thing he did in writing. Gerald, with respect, you're new here. Maple Ridge has operated smoothly for years. We don't have staff to satisfy fishing expeditions from every homeowner who thinks they're an accountant. I smiled when I saw that, not because it was funny, because he had put the problem in a sentence. I wrote back, thank you, Victor. To be clear, I am requesting inspection under Section 12 of the bylaws and the applicable state statute. Please confirm a date within the required inspection period. No response. On day 9, I sent the request by certified mail to the association's registered address and to Marlene's address listed in the annual report. On day 10, I received an email from a general Ridgeway community management account. Dear homeowner, your request has been received. Records may be reviewed by appointment at the Ridgeway office on the 3rd Thursday of next month between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. Copying fees are $1.25 per page. Electronic copies are not available. The 3rd Thursday of next month was 34 days away. The Ridgeway office, according to the footer, was in a business park 42 minutes from my house, and the state statute said records had to be made available within 10 business days. That was the first time I wondered whether I was looking at stubbornness or something else. I could have let it go. Honestly, part of me wanted to. I had moved to Maple Ridge to simplify my life. I did not want to become the old man with the binder. Nobody wants to become that man, even when he is right. There is a special loneliness in being the person who raises their hand when everyone else is staring at the floor. But then, Rosa Alvarez knocked on my door. It was a Saturday morning. I had been trimming a basil plant on the patio when the doorbell rang. Rosa stood on the porch holding a manila envelope against her chest. She was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with dark hair pulled back and a face that looked kind until it got tired. That day, it looked tired. Mr. Whitaker, I'm Rosa, from the meeting. Gerald, please, come in. She glanced behind her like someone might be watching from the street. Can we talk out here? So we sat on the porch. She handed me the envelope. Inside were fine notices. A lot of them. $50 for trash cans visible from the street at 8:04 p.m. on pickup day. $100 for weeds along a fence line. $250 for an unapproved exterior modification that turned out to be a wheelchair ramp her son had installed for her grandson during a holiday visit. Late fees on fines, administrative fees on late fees, legal fees for a collection letter. The total was $4,870. I paid what I could, she said. Then my car needed work. Then they added more. I tried to appeal. Marlene said the board had already decided. Did they give you a hearing? She shook her head. They sent a letter saying I missed it. I never got notice. Then last week this came. She pulled one more paper from the envelope. It was a notice of intent to lien. I felt my jaw tighten. Who sent this? Ridgeway. Same company from the meeting. The letterhead was Ridgeway Community Management. The signature was a scanned scribble over the name Darren Cole, Community Portfolio Director. I used to watch my grandson after school, Rosa said. When the pool worked, we went there 3 times a week. He has cerebral palsy. The water helps. Now I can't even let him come because if they put a lien on my house, my daughter will think I did something wrong. There are moments when a story stops being numbers. I had been curious before. Irritated maybe. But sitting on that porch with Rosa's envelope on my knees, looking at a retired teacher being crushed by administrative fees while the pool sat behind a chain, I felt something settle inside me. I asked if I could make copies. She said, "Do whatever you need." That was the moment I stopped being new. 2 days later, Maple Ridge announced a special assessment. The email landed at 7:12 p.m. on a Monday. Subject line, Important Community Financial Notice. Every owner would owe $1,850, due in 2 installments, for urgent reserve stabilization, deferred pool infrastructure, drainage remediation, and legal contingency. Failure to pay would result in late fees, collection costs, suspension of amenities, and possible lien action. Suspension of amenities was an interesting threat, considering the main amenity was already closed. My monthly pension was steady, but it was not elastic. $1,850 mattered. For some people in Maple Ridge, it was the difference between making it through a month and putting groceries on a credit card. By Tuesday afternoon, the neighborhood Facebook group had turned into a panic room. Can they do this? Why are reserves empty? Didn't dues just go up? What pool infrastructure? The pool has been closed all summer. Marlene posted once. The board understands concerns. This assessment is necessary due to years of underfunding before the current board made responsible corrections. Please avoid speculation. Direct all questions to Ridgeway. Years of underfunding before the current board. Marlene had been president for 5 years. I replied with one sentence. Has the board published the reserve account statements showing the underfunding? Within 10 minutes, my comment was deleted. Within 15, posting was turned off. Within 20, I had 3 private messages from neighbors I had never met. One was from a man named Devin, who said his mother lived on Cedar Court and could not pay the assessment. One was from a young couple with a newborn who had closed on their house 2 months earlier and felt trapped. The third was from someone named LK with no profile picture. The message said, "You should talk to Evelyn Hart, former board secretary. She resigned last year. She knows about Ridgeway. Don't say I sent you." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Thank you." There are 2 kinds of secrets in small communities. The first kind is hidden because nobody knows. The second is hidden because everyone knows just enough to be afraid of saying it first. Evelyn Hart lived on Maple Lane, in a blue house with white shutters and a porch swing. She answered the door before I knocked, which told me she had been watching through the side window. She was in her 70s, thin, sharp-eyed, and wearing a cardigan despite the heat. "Mr. Whitaker?" "Gerald. I figured someone would send you. Come in." Her living room had doilies on the armchairs and a framed photo of a man in a navy uniform on the piano. On the coffee table were 2 stacks of paper already arranged. "I was secretary for 3 years," she said. Then Victor decided minutes were too detailed. "Too detailed?" She gave me a look. "You know exactly what that means." I did. She poured iced tea into 2 glasses and sat across from me. Her hands were steady. "Ridgway came in 18 months ago," she said. "Before that, we used a company called Lakeview Property Services. They weren't perfect, but they charged $3,800 a month. Ridgway started at $7,500, then added fees. Compliance inspections, vendor coordination, emergency administration, special project management. Every month had a new line. Was there a vote? Board vote, 3-2. I voted no. Paul voted no. Marlene, Victor, and Nathan voted yes. Tessa abstained because she said she didn't have enough information. Then Marlene counted it as not opposed. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "Do you have minutes?" Evelyn tapped the first stack. "Draft minutes." The approved versions removed half of it. In the draft minutes, Evelyn had recorded questions about Ridgway's ownership, bidding, and scope. In the approved minutes, the same agenda item read, "Management contract discussed. Motion passed." That is not minutes. That is a burial. Then she showed me the second stack. Vendor contracts. She did not have every document, but she had enough. A landscaping contract with Green Line Grounds. A pool service contract with Astor Pool and Pump. A roof repair estimate never approved. And the Ridgway Community Management Agreement, signed by Marlene as president and Victor as treasurer. The Ridgway Agreement had a base fee, plus administrative fees, plus project coordination fees, plus compliance inspection fees, plus a percentage markup on certain vendor-managed projects. It also gave Ridgway authority to issue violation letters, collect fines, recommend liens, and coordinate legal referrals. In other words, the company that got paid to manage compliance also got paid more when compliance became more complicated. I asked Evelyn the question I had been circling. "Do you know who owns Ridgway?" She looked toward the front window. A car passed slowly outside. On paper, a man named Darren Cole. Victor's wife is named Anna Hale. Her maiden name is Cole. Darren is her brother. There it was. Not proof of theft. Not yet. But a thread. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. I regretted it as soon as the words left my mouth. Her face tightened. "I did," she said. "I asked at a board meeting whether the relationship should be disclosed. Marlene told me to stop implying misconduct without evidence. Victor said if I continued defaming vendors, the association's attorney would have to get involved. Then they removed me from the bank signature list and stopped sending me complete packets. I resigned a month later." She reached for an envelope at the bottom of the stack. 2 weeks after that, I got a violation for my porch swing being 6 inches too close to the railing. That swing has been there since 2009. I did not say anything for a moment. Evelyn slid the contracts toward me. "You can copy these, but don't use my name yet." "I won't." "And Gerald?" "Yes." "They're not just sloppy. Be careful." I drove home with the papers in a grocery bag on the passenger seat. Halfway back, I pulled into the pharmacy parking lot and just sat there with the engine running. I had seen this pattern before. In cities, in special districts, in small public bodies where the budget was boring enough that nobody watched it. The numbers did not have to be huge at first. They just had to be unexamined. A management fee here, a project markup there, a legal letter billed at a flat rate. A reserve transfer that sat long enough to look proper, then vanished into a vendor payment that sounded official. People think theft looks like someone kicking in a door. Most of the time, it looks like an invoice. The next board meeting was packed. The special assessment had done what the closed pool never could. It made people count. Marlene opened by saying comments would be limited to 2 minutes per homeowner. A man yelled, "We get 2 minutes, but you get $1,850? Marlene banged a little wooden gavel. I had no idea where she bought it. No HOA board should own a gavel. Victor leaned into the microphone. Folks, nobody likes assessments, but reserves are not optional. We have obligations. Rosa stood near the aisle, clutching her purse. She had agreed to speak, but when Marlene called for comments, Rosa's hand only went halfway up. I saw it tremble and drop. So I stood. Gerald Whitaker, 118 Sycamore. I submitted a statutory records inspection request on July 14th. The association did not make records available within the required period. I am renewing that request tonight and asking the board to suspend the special assessment deadline until members can inspect the records supporting it. Marlene's jaw moved before she spoke. The board will not be bullied by procedural games. Inspection rights are not a game. Victor said, "You had an appointment offered. You chose not to attend." The appointment was outside the statutory deadline and limited to 1 hour at an off-site vendor office with a copying fee that appears unreasonable. Nathan, the architecture board member, muttered, "Here we go." I turned my head slightly. Yes, here we go. A few people laughed. Not loud. Enough. Marlene banged the gavel again. "Mr. Whitaker, your 2 minutes are over." "Then please record my request in the minutes." Tessa, at the end of the table, looked down and wrote something. Victor watched her pen move. That mattered later. The next morning, I received a letter from Ridgeway. Not an email. A letter in an envelope with a red stamp that said "Notice." It accused me of disruptive conduct at the meeting, spreading unfounded allegations, and interfering with association operations. It warned that continued conduct could result in fines, suspension of privileges, and legal action. It was signed by Darren Cole. I put it in the binder. Then I made 3 copies. A week later, Rosa received a lien notice. That one hit harder. I had hoped, foolishly, that once people started watching, the board would step back from the fines. Instead, they accelerated. Ridgeway added $650 in legal preparation fees and $300 in administrative processing. The new total was $5,820. Rosa called me from her car. I could hear traffic through the phone. "I think I should stop," she said. "Stop what?" "Talking to you. Asking questions. Maybe if I pay something, they'll leave me alone." I looked at the binder on my desk. It was already too full for the 1-inch rings. "Rosa, do what you need to do for your peace. I won't tell you to fight if you can't." She was quiet. Then she said, "My husband died in that house. I worked 32 years to pay it off. They're making me feel like I'm renting it from them." That sentence stayed with me. The board had power because people were isolated. One homeowner with a fine felt ashamed. One homeowner with questions felt like a crank. One homeowner with a fixed income felt like a target. The board's whole system depended on keeping everyone alone with their own envelope. So we stopped being alone. I did not start with accusations. That would have been a gift to them. I started with process. I printed a 1-page notice and walked it door to door with Rosa on a Sunday afternoon. It said, "Homeowner Records Inspection Group." It explained, in plain English, that state law and the bylaws allowed members to inspect association financial records, contracts, invoices, bank statements, and meeting minutes. It said we were gathering signatures for a joint inspection demand and, if necessary, a special members' meeting. It included my email, Rosa's email, and a line that said, "This is not a lawsuit. This is a request to see the records paid for by our dues." People opened their doors in different ways. Some were relieved. They had been waiting for somebody else to say it. Some were suspicious. They had seen neighborhood drama before and wanted no part of it. Some were angry at us for making them choose. Those were the hardest. Not because they disagreed, because I could see they believed us and hated that believing us might cost them comfort. At one house, a man in a baseball cap said, "Look, I don't like Marlene either, but liens are serious. They can make your life hell." Rosa stood beside me and said, "They're already doing that." He looked at her envelope of notices, then he signed. At another house, a woman whispered through a cracked door, "My husband says don't get involved." I said, "That's all right. Here's the information, no pressure." She took the paper. That night, she signed electronically from an email address with no name in it. By the end of the week, we had 43 signatures. By the end of the next, 76. Enough to get attention. Not enough yet for a special meeting, but close. And that is when the retaliation found me. The notice came on a Wednesday. I remember because I had just come back from the grocery store and was putting eggs into the refrigerator when my phone buzzed. Email from Ridgeway. Subject: Enforcement action pending. The letter said my front porch contained unauthorized containers and non-conforming vegetation. Containers meant the tomato pots. Non-conforming vegetation meant basil. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. Then I read the second page. It said failure to remove the items within 10 days would result in fines of $100 per day, and continued non-compliance could be referred for lien enforcement. It also referenced my ongoing pattern of disruptive conduct as an aggravating factor. They had threatened to lien a retired auditor over basil. I took photos of the pots. I took photos of 7 other porches on my street with pots. I took photos of Marlene's own front steps, which had 2 urns full of red geraniums the size of beach balls. Then I put all of it in the binder. That night, I almost called my daughter and told her I was done. Her name is Laura. She lives 2 hours away with her husband and 2 teenagers who send me text messages made mostly of abbreviations I pretend to understand. Laura worries about me in the practical way her mother used to worry. Did you eat? Did you sleep? Are you talking to people? She had been proud when I moved to Maple Ridge because she thought the community would be good for me. I did not want to tell her that the community had turned into a part-time job with legal threats. But she called me. "You sound tired," she said after about 30 seconds. "I'm fine. Dad." That one word had a lot of Ellen in it. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. The dues, the records, Rosa, the lien threats, the basil. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know Mom would have already made signs." I smiled before I could stop myself. "Your mother would have charmed the documents out of them by now." "No," Laura said. "Mom would have charmed the neighbors. Then she would have pointed them at you." That was true. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at Ellen's spoon rest by the stove. I had almost packed it away before the move. At the last minute, I wrapped it in a towel and put it in the box marked Kitchen Fragile. It was shaped like a leaf. Green ceramic, chipped at the tip. I thought about Rosa saying they made her feel like she was renting her own house. I thought about Victor saying we did not need every line. And I opened my laptop. The next inspection demand went out with 76 signatures attached. This time, I sent it by certified mail, email, and hand delivery to Marlene's porch. I copied Ridgeway, every board member, and the association's registered agent. I cited the statute again. I cited the bylaws again. I requested electronic copies to avoid copying costs, or in-person inspection at the clubhouse within the statutory period. I specifically requested Operating account bank statements for the past 24 months. Reserve account bank statements for the past 24 months. General ledger detail by vendor. All invoices and payment records for Ridgeway Community Management. All contracts, amendments, and bids related to Ridgeway. Pool repair invoices and correspondence. Landscaping invoices and correspondence. Legal invoices related to collection and enforcement. Board minutes, including draft minutes and packets. Conflict of interest disclosures. I knew that list would scare them if there was something to hide. It did. Marlene replied within 2 hours. The board will consider this request at its next executive session. In the meantime, continued harassment of volunteers may be referred to council. I replied, "Thank you. Please identify the legal basis for delaying statutory inspection until an executive session." No response. Then Victor made his second careless mistake. He called me. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I thought better of it and answered. I did not record the call because my state requires consent in some circumstances, and I had no interest in becoming the problem. But I took notes while he spoke. "Gerald," he said, with that forced warmth people use when they want the knife to feel like a handshake. "What are we doing here?" "I'm requesting records." "No, you're stirring people up. You're frightening retirees. You're making accusations you can't support." "I have not accused anyone of anything in writing." "Come on, we both know what you're implying." "Then make the records available and settle it." He exhaled hard. "You spent your career in government, right? So you know how this works. There are always line items that look strange if you don't understand the whole picture. That's why inspection is useful. You don't need to see every line." There it was again, softer this time, almost pleading. I wrote the exact words in my notebook. "Victor," I said, "when someone tells an auditor not to look at every line, that is usually where the work starts." The line went quiet. Then he said, "You're going to regret making enemies here." He hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling my pulse in my wrist. Not fear, exactly. Something close. I was not young. I lived alone. These people knew where I lived, what car I drove, when my porch light went off. A lien was not just a piece of paper. It could cloud title. It could hurt credit. It could force legal expense. It could turn retirement into a trench. That was the lowest point for me. Not the Basil letter, not the meeting, that phone call. Because for one long minute, I understood why everyone backed away. The next morning, Rosa came over with coffee and a folder. "I found 3 more people with fine letters," she said. "One of them paid after they threatened a lien. Another one moved." Moved? "Sold to an investor. She said she couldn't take it anymore." Rosa set the folder on my table. Also, I called my cousin. He works at a bank, not our bank. But he said if reserve money is being moved weird, statements will show transfers even if invoices don't. I looked at her. "Rosa Alvarez." "What?" "You're becoming dangerous." She smiled for the first time in days. Good. That little folder changed the whole rhythm. Until then, I had been the retired auditor helping a neighbor. After that, Rosa became a co-petitioner in every meaningful sense. She knew people. She knew who had lost a spouse, who had a son on disability, who had taken a second job, who was too proud to admit the assessment would hurt. She could knock on a door I could not. People who saw me as paperwork saw her as a person. Together, we built a map. Not a literal map at first. A spreadsheet. Address, owner name, fine history if shared, assessment concerns, willingness to sign inspection demand, willingness to sign special meeting petition, willingness to speak publicly. I hated that we needed columns for fear, but we did. People would say, "I'll sign, but don't put my name online." Or, "I'll attend, but I won't speak. Or, if my husband sees this, he'll get mad. The board had spent years teaching people that attention brought punishment. We had to teach them that attention also brought witnesses. While Rosa worked the neighborhood, I worked the paper. I looked up Ridgeway Community Management in the state business database. It had been formed 26 months earlier. Registered agent, Darren Cole. Mailing address, a suite in a business park. Principal office, same suite. The suite, when I searched it, turned out to be a virtual office service that rented mailboxes and conference rooms by the hour. Darren Cole had 2 other businesses. One was inactive. The other was Cole Administrative Solutions, formed 6 years earlier and dissolved for failing to file an annual report. Anna Hale, Victor's wife, appeared as an officer on that older company in one archived filing. That did not prove Ridgeway was Victor's company. It did prove Victor had not been exactly transparent when he voted to hire his brother-in-law's management firm. Then I looked at the county property records. Darren Cole owned a house 2 towns over. Victor and Anna Hale had refinanced their home 9 months after Ridgeway was hired. Again, not proof. People refinance for all kinds of reasons, but the amount caught my eye because it roughly matched the jump in management fees over the first year. I printed everything: state filings, county records, screenshots with dates. I also wrote notes on what each document did not prove, because that matters. If you overstate your evidence, you give the other side a clean way to discredit all of it. By then, the board had agreed to a records inspection, but only because they had run out of ways to pretend the statute did not exist. The appointment was set for a Tuesday at 10 a.m. at the clubhouse. They said no photographs, no scanning, no bags, and no removal of documents. We could inspect for 90 minutes. Copies would be available at $1 per page. I replied that photos or scans were a reasonable means of inspection and that the copying fee was excessive. They did not answer. I went anyway. Rosa came with me. So did Devin, the man whose mother lived on Cedar Court. Evelyn did not come, but she texted me that morning. Remember, they will try to bury important things in boring piles. She was right. When we walked into the clubhouse, Marlene was already there with Victor and a woman I had never seen before. The woman introduced herself as Kendra from Ridgeway. She had a laptop, a banker box, and the expression of someone who had been told we were difficult. On the table were folders labeled budget, minutes, contracts, invoices, no bank statements. I asked about them. Kendra said, "Those contain sensitive account information." "Then redact account numbers," I said. "Balances, deposits, withdrawals, and cleared checks are association records." Marlene said, "We're not here to debate. You have 90 minutes. I opened my notebook. "Then please note that bank statements were not produced." Victor said, "You don't get to create a record of this meeting." I looked at him. "Victor, that's exactly what a notebook is." Rosa coughed into her hand. Devin looked at the floor. We started with invoices. At first it was ordinary. Landscaping, insurance, utility bills, pest control, pool chemicals from before the closure. Then Ridgeway invoices began appearing every month like a second mortgage. Base management fee, $7,500. Compliance drive-through inspection, $1,200. Violation processing, $35 per letter. Fine administration, $18 per account. Special assessment project coordination, $4,800. Pool infrastructure vendor coordination, $6,200. Reserve stabilization consulting, $9,750. I paused on that one. "Can I see the deliverable for reserve stabilization consulting?" Kendra blinked. "The what?" "Report, analysis, schedule, recommendation. Whatever Ridgeway produced for $9,750. She looked at Victor. Victor said, "It was advisory." "Advice can be written down." Marlene said, "Move on." I wrote, "No deliverable produced." The pool invoices were worse. Astor Pool and Pump had submitted a repair estimate for $14,200 to replace the pump motor and address a leak. The estimate was dated May 3rd. A follow-up email from Astor on June 12th said, "We cannot proceed until the outstanding prior balance is paid." The outstanding balance was $3,860, but Ridgeway had billed Maple Ridge $6,200 for pool infrastructure vendor coordination in June and $3,400 in July. So Ridgeway was paid to coordinate a vendor the association had not paid enough to start work? I asked. Kendra said, "I can't speak to that." Victor said, "You're mischaracterizing the timeline." "Then clarify it." He did not. Rosa was going through violation records. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Why are some people charged legal prep fees before a lawyer is involved?" Kendra said, "Those are standard administrative pass-throughs." "Pass-through to who?" No answer. Devin found the landscaping folder. Greenline Grounds had billed $4,900 a month for full common area service. But there were handwritten notes on several invoices. Entrance only this week per VH. And clubhouse beds excluded until further notice. VH was Victor Hale. So homeowners were paying full landscaping while Victor told the landscaper to skip areas. I asked for copies of 23 pages. Kendra calculated the fee at $23. I paid by check, mostly because I wanted the canceled check later. As we were packing up, Tessa came in. She was the quiet board member who took minutes. She carried a tote bag and looked surprised to see us, although I think that was for Marlene's benefit. "I thought the inspection was at noon," she said. Marlene frowned. "No, 10. "Oh, sorry. I brought the old packets you asked about." Victor's head turned. "What packets?" Tessa set the tote bag on the table. "Last year's board packets. You said Gerald requested packets." For 1 second the room went completely still. Marlene said, "Those weren't reviewed." Tessa's face went pink. "You told me to bring records. These are records." Victor stepped toward the bag. I stepped too, not aggressively, just enough. "We'll inspect those," I said. Marlene said, "Your time is up." I looked at my watch. "We have 8 minutes." Tessa opened the bag. Inside were board packets with email printouts, draft minutes, vendor comparisons, and something I had been hoping existed but had not expected to see. A conflict of interest form. It was blank. There was a line for board member name, a line for vendor relationship, a line for disclosure, a signature line. The form had been included in the packet for the meeting where Ridgeway was approved. In the margin, someone had written, "Discuss V/D relationship?" The handwriting looked like Evelyn's. In the approved minutes, no conflict discussion appeared. Tessa stood beside the table, eyes fixed on the floor. I copied the form number and packet date into my notebook. I did not ask to copy it because I knew Marlene would refuse, and because sometimes a note is enough to guide the next request. As we left, Victor followed me to the door. "You think you're clever," he said quietly. "No," I said. "I think you're careless." That was the first time I let myself sound like I knew something. He did not like it. 2 days later, my basil violation became a fine, $100, then $200, then $300. Ridgeway sent daily notices with automated precision. I left the pots where they were, not because I cared about basil that much, but because selective enforcement is strongest when the target does not fix the harmless thing before documenting it. I sent the board photos of other potted plants, including Marlene's geraniums. I requested the written standard defining non-conforming vegetation. I requested the inspection log showing all similar violations. I requested the authority for $100 per day fines without a hearing. They responded with silence. On day 5, I received a notice of intent to lien for Basil. I will admit something. I sat down when I opened it. Even when you know a threat is absurd, the paper still lands. The words intent to lien look ugly in your own kitchen. I thought about the house. I thought about my daughter. I thought about how Ellen would have put her hand on my shoulder and told me to breathe before I started writing emails. Then I scanned the notice and sent it to every homeowner who had signed the petition. Subject line: "This is why records matter." Rosa called 10 minutes later. "You okay?" "Yes." "Liar." "A little not okay." "Good, that means you're human. Now check your email." She had sent me 17 photos of potted plants from around Maple Ridge, each labeled with address and date. Devin sent 9 more. By morning, I had 53. Marlene had 2 urns. Victor had a ceramic planter shaped like a barrel. Nathan had a row of succulents on his porch wall. The community itself had 6 planters outside the clubhouse, all dead except for one brave weed. I made a packet called Selective Enforcement and put the Basil notice on the first page. That packet later became one of the reasons the lien threat stopped. But we were not there yet. The next stage was the special meeting petition. Under the bylaws, 20% of members could call a special meeting. Maple Ridge had 312 lots, so we needed 63 valid signatures. We already had more than that from the inspection demand, but a special meeting petition had stricter requirements: printed names, property addresses, signatures, date, purpose of meeting. The purpose had to be specific enough to be valid but not so narrow that Marlene could wriggle out of it. I drafted it carefully. The petition requested a special meeting to consider rescission or suspension of the special assessment pending independent financial review, appointment of an independent forensic accountant, recall of board officers if warranted, and any other lawful action related to association financial oversight. Rosa read it and said, "That's a mouthful." "It's supposed to be." "Can we put 'show us the money' at the top?" "No." "Can I say it while collecting signatures?" "Absolutely." She did. The petition spread faster than the first notice because people had seen the Basil letter. Nothing radicalizes a neighborhood like an obviously stupid abuse of power. People who were unsure about financial records could understand a board threatening a lien over a tomato pot. It made the whole thing visible. A week later, we had 89 signatures. Marlene rejected 21. She said some signatures did not match association records. Some owners were not in good standing because of unpaid fines or assessments. Some properties were held in trusts, and the trustee had not signed in the correct capacity. One owner had used blue ink that scanned poorly. That one was my favorite. Even after her rejections, we had 68. Enough. The special meeting had to be scheduled within 30 days. Instead, the board announced an informational town hall, hosted by Ridgeway, with no votes allowed. That was when we brought in someone outside the neighborhood. I knew a retired forensic accountant named Sheila Park from my old job. Sheila was 5 feet tall, wore bright scarves, and had once found a $2.3 million procurement fraud because a vendor used the same typo in 3 different shell companies. She did not scare easily. She also did not work for free, and I would not ask her to. I called her and explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you have bank statements?" "Not yet." "Then you have smoke, not fire." "I know." "Do you have contracts?" "Some." "Invoices?" "Some." "Ownership connection?" "Brother-in-law?" "Prior business tie to treasurer's wife." "No disclosure located." She made a little humming sound. "That's enough for a review proposal, not enough for conclusions. Don't let angry neighbors push you into saying fraud before you can prove it." "I won't." "Good." Send me what you have. I'll write a limited scope proposal. Fixed fee. Records dependent. If the association hires me, I answer to the membership, not your little resistance group. That's what I want. Gerald? Yes. You always were a magnet for boring crimes. I've missed you too, Sheila. Her proposal was perfect because it was dry. It did not say corruption. It said limited forensic review of management fees, vendor payments, reserve transfers, special assessment support, conflict disclosures, and enforcement cost allocations. It listed required records. It listed procedures. It listed deliverables. It cost $6,500, which was less than 1 month of Ridgeway's base management fee. We sent the proposal to the board and every petition signer. Victor responded to all by mistake. Absolutely not. This is how these people get in the door and run up bills. We already have professional management. These people. That phrase did more for our petition than any flyer I made. At the town hall, Ridgway sent Darren Cole himself. I had seen his name on letters, but not his face. He was younger than Victor by maybe 15 years, with slicked hair, a tight suit, and the kind of smile that asks you to admire it. He set up a laptop at the front of the clubhouse and projected a slide that said Maple Ridge Financial Stabilization Plan. The plan had stock photos in it. A smiling family by a pool that was definitely not ours. A row of green shrubs that looked like they had never met our landscaping crew. A bar chart with no source labels. Darren spoke for 20 minutes about community values and responsible stewardship. He used the word stakeholders 4 times. Every time he did, Rosa made a tick mark on her copy of the handout. Then he opened for questions. I raised my hand. Darren smiled. Mr. Whitaker, I assume. Yes. Your slide says the special assessment includes $92,000 for reserve stabilization. Where will those funds be held? Association reserve account. What is the current reserve balance? I don't have that number in front of me. He was standing in front of a financial stabilization slide and did not have the reserve balance. I nodded. Your company billed $9,750 for reserve stabilization consulting in May. Did that consulting produce a written report? His smile thinned. Our management recommendations are incorporated into board planning. So no report? That's not what I said. Then can members inspect the report? Marlene stepped in. This is an informational meeting, not an interrogation. Rosa stood. Fine, I have a question. Why did Ridgway charge me legal prep fees before any lawyer sent me a letter? Darren looked at his laptop. I can't discuss individual accounts. You discussed them enough to threaten my house. The room went quiet. Rosa's voice shook, but she kept going. You charged me for trash cans, for weeds, for a ramp my grandson needed. You added fees I didn't understand. Then you told me if I didn't pay, you could lien my home. So if we're stakeholders, tell me what stake I have left. Nobody moved. Darren said, Ma'am, enforcement protects property values. From the back, someone said, What about stealing them? Marlene banged the gavel. Again, with the gavel. Darren tried to continue, but the room had shifted. Not because we had proven everything. Because Rosa had made the cost human. After the meeting, Tessa caught me in the parking lot. She looked smaller outside the board table. I can't talk long, she said. Okay. She handed me a folded piece of paper. I found this in an old email. I don't know if it matters. Then she walked away. In my car, I unfolded it. It was an email from Darren Cole to Victor, dated 2 weeks before Ridgway's contract was approved. Subject, revised fee schedule. Darren wrote, V, updated schedule attached, built-in admin recovery as discussed. Once MP signs, first quarter should catch up the shortfall. A can explain if needed. V. MP. A. Victor. Marlene Price. Anna. The attachment was not printed, but the sentence was enough to make my hands go cold. Built-in admin recovery as discussed. Catch up the shortfall. What shortfall? That email became the new center of the board, not the HOA board. Our board. My dining table, actually. Rosa, Devin, Evelyn, and I sat around it 2 nights later with coffee, highlighters, and stacks of paper. Evelyn confirmed the email addresses. Devin searched his laptop for Ridgeway complaints in other communities and found 2 online reviews saying the same thing. Fees, fines, poor records, sudden assessments. Rosa looked at the line again. Who's A? Anna, probably, Evelyn said. Victor's wife. Why would Anna explain? Nobody answered. I had a guess, but guesses are not evidence. The breakthrough came from the bank statements. Not because the board finally handed them over willingly. They didn't. They kept refusing, delaying, redacting, and pretending account balances were state secrets. The breakthrough came because Tessa, who was still technically a board member, had online read-only access to old statements from before Victor removed most signers. She called me on a Thursday night. If I give you something, she said, can I get in trouble? What kind of something? Statements, from when I had access. I downloaded them last year because the numbers in the packets didn't match. I never showed anyone because I got scared. I closed my eyes. Tessa, I can't give you legal advice. If they're association records you had access to as a board member, they should be available to members. But if you're worried, talk to an attorney before sending anything. She laughed once, bitterly. With what money? Then send them to Sheila, not me. If the association approves her review, she can request them formally. If not, keep them safe. Gerald, they're going to destroy me if I wait. Her voice cracked on destroy. That was when I understood the board members were not all villains. Some were trapped by their own earlier silence. Tessa had gone along too long. Now she was trying to find a door. We did not use the statements publicly yet. But Tessa agreed to sign a declaration for the special meeting saying bank statements existed that did not match summary reports, and that she supported an independent review. That declaration tipped the room. The special meeting was finally scheduled for October 18th at 7 p.m. The notice tried to limit the agenda to member concerns regarding assessment communication. I objected in writing. So did 47 other owners. The final notice included discussion and possible vote on independent forensic review. It did not include recall. Marlene claimed recall required a separate notice. She was half right. The bylaws were not cleanly written. I had read them enough times by then to know we could vote to petition for recall and schedule a follow-up meeting, but removing directors that night would be challenged. I told people that even though some wanted to force it, that was important. If you want a process to survive, you cannot only follow the rules when they help you. On the day of the meeting, Ridgeway sent another letter accusing me, Rosa, and associated members of defamation, harassment, and interference with contractual relations. It demanded that we cease distributing materials implying wrongdoing by Ridgeway or board members. I read it twice. Then I added it to the packet for the meeting. The clubhouse could not hold everyone. People spilled onto the patio. Someone brought a portable speaker so people outside could hear. Marlene looked furious before the meeting even started. Victor looked calm, which worried me more. Darren Cole was there, sitting near the front in a gray suit. Anna Hale was not, but Victor kept checking his phone. Marlene opened by saying the board would allow comments, then consider whether an independent review was necessary. I stood with my binder. My hands were dry. My mouth was not. My name is Gerald Whitaker. I live at 118 Sycamore. I moved here 5 months ago. I did not come here looking for a fight. I asked to inspect records because dues increased. The pool stayed closed, the landscaping declined, and a special assessment was imposed without adequate support. That inspection was delayed, restricted, and incomplete. Since then, multiple homeowners have received lien threats after asking questions. One of those threats was sent to me over potted basil. A low murmur moved through the room. I held up the notice. I am not asking anyone tonight to assume fraud. I am asking you not to assume trust where records should be. That line landed. I could feel it. Then I walked through the packet. Slowly. No drama. Ridgeway contract. No competitive bid produced. Known family relationship between Ridgeway's owner and Victor's wife. Blank conflict form in the board packet. Ridgeway invoices totaling more than $100,000 in 12 months. Pool vendor estimate not paid while Ridgeway billed coordination fees. Landscaping billed at full rate while work was reduced. Enforcement fees applied before legal involvement. Special assessment support without reserve statements. Victor interrupted 3 times. The first time, he said, "You're cherry-picking." I said, "Then support the independent review so all cherries can be counted." The second time, he said, "You don't understand HOA management." I said, "Possibly. That's why Sheila Park's proposal is from a forensic accountant." The third time, he said, "This is defamatory." Rosa stood up beside me. "Is my lien notice defamatory too?" Victor sat back. Then Tessa stood. That was not planned. She had told me she might speak. I did not count on it. Her voice was quiet, but the room was quiet enough. "I'm on the board," she said. I should have asked harder questions earlier. I didn't. I was afraid of being sued or fined or blamed, but the records are not complete. The packets changed. Draft minutes were shortened. I asked for bank statements and was told Victor had it handled. I support the independent review. Marlene stared at her like she had slapped her. "Tessa," Marlene said, "sit down." Tessa did not. Evelyn, from the 3rd row, said, "Let her speak." Then someone else said, "Let her speak." Then 20 people said it. Marlene banged the gavel so hard the head flew off and rolled under the table. I wish I were making that up. For one perfect second, the whole room watched the little wooden head roll across the beige tile and stop against Victor's shoe. No one laughed at first. Then Devin snorted. Then the entire room broke. Marlene's face went red. Victor picked up the gavel head and set it on the table like evidence. That ridiculous moment did something useful. It broke the spell. The board was no longer a distant authority. They were 5 neighbors at a folding table, one of them holding a broken gavel. The vote to hire Sheila Park for an independent limited forensic review passed by a show of hands so overwhelming Marlene demanded a written count. The written count was 132 to 19. The board could still delay, but not without showing its face. Under pressure and with Tessa now openly supporting the review, they approved Sheila's engagement the following week. Ridgeway objected to the scope. Sheila responded by requesting the records directly from the association, including unredacted bank statements, check images, contracts, invoices, electronic accounting exports, and all communications regarding Ridgeway's engagement and fees. Victor tried to limit the bank statements to summaries. Sheila wrote back, "A summary of a bank statement is not a bank statement." I printed that email and put it on my refrigerator. The next 6 weeks were not dramatic from the outside. That is how real investigations work. People expect movie scenes, doors kicked open, someone shouting, "Gotcha." Most of it is quieter. A spreadsheet open at midnight, a missing check number, a vendor name spelled 2 ways, a transfer that makes sense until you compare dates. Sheila worked with 2 assistants. I was not part of the review team, which was appropriate. But because I had organized the petition, homeowners kept sending me what they had: fine letters, payment receipts, screenshots, photos, old newsletters promising pool repairs. I forwarded relevant items to Sheila and kept my own index. The first sign that the review had teeth came when Ridgeway stopped sending daily enforcement notices. The second came when the special assessment deadline was postponed. The third came when Victor stopped attending neighborhood events. He had been everywhere before: clubhouse coffee hour, landscaping walkthroughs, pool gate inspections for a pool nobody could use. Suddenly, he was busy. Marlene said he had family obligations. Darren Cole stopped replying to emails except through a generic Ridgeway inbox. Meanwhile, we learned what had actually happened to the dues, not all at once, piece by piece. The operating account received dues. That part was normal. Each month, a reserve transfer was recorded in the ledger. Also normal. But in several months, the reserve transfer went into the reserve account, and then, within days, a similar amount moved back to operating with a memo like temporary cash flow or vendor timing. From operating, checks went to Ridgeway for special project fees, enforcement administration, and consulting. The reserve contributions existed long enough to appear on internal reports, then they were pulled back out. That was why the reserves never materialized. There were also duplicate Ridgeway charges, a base monthly fee, plus separate fees for tasks that the base contract already covered. Vendor coordination fees for vendors who reported they had not been authorized to proceed. Compliance inspection fees for dates when no inspection logs existed. Administrative processing fees charged to individual homeowners and also to the association. Double dipping is an ugly phrase, but sometimes ugly phrases are accurate. Then came the ownership trail. Ridgeway was owned by Darren Cole. Darren was Victor's brother-in-law. That relationship was not disclosed in the minutes. But Sheila found more. The virtual office invoices for Ridgeway had been paid from a debit card ending in 4 digits that matched an account jointly held by Darren Cole and Anna Hale before Ridgeway opened its own business account. Early Ridgeway startup costs had been reimbursed through a consulting advance from Maple Ridge's operating account, approved by Victor and Marlene before the management contract was formally executed. Read that again slowly. The HOA paid a consulting advance to a company before hiring it, and that company's early expenses tied back to the treasurer's family. Sheila did not call it embezzlement in the draft report. Professionals are careful. She called it undisclosed related party activity, unsupported payments, control deficiencies, improper reserve transfers, and potential misappropriation requiring legal review. To normal people, that means the smoke alarm is screaming. To Victor, apparently, it meant he should double down. A week before the report was to be presented, I received a letter from an attorney representing Ridgeway and Darren Cole. It accused me of defamation and tortious interference. It demanded I retract statements that Ridgeway was owned by Victor or his family, that Ridgeway had stolen funds, and that the board had committed crimes. I had never said those things in those words. That was deliberate. The letter demanded $10,000 for reputational harm and legal costs. I sat with it for a long time. Then I did something I had resisted doing because I did not want to spend the money. I hired a lawyer for 1 hour. Her name was Priya Shah. She was a community association attorney recommended by Sheila. Her office was in a brick building near the county courthouse, and she had the calmest waiting room I have ever seen. No television. Just plants and a water cooler. Priya read the letter, read my packets, and said, "This is a pressure letter." That's what I thought. It may still need a response, but you were careful. You framed records as records and questions as questions. Good. Can they lean me over the basil fines? They can try. Whether it survives is different. Selective enforcement, lack of hearing, retaliation, you have defenses. Defenses cost money. They do. That's the point of the threat. She drafted a short response for me. It said, I denied the allegations, reserved all rights, would not retract true statements or protected opinions based on association records, and considered the letter further evidence of retaliation against members exercising statutory rights. It cost me $475. I sent it and felt sick for the rest of the day. That is something revenge stories sometimes skip. Even when you are right, it costs you. Money, sleep, appetite. The simple pleasure of walking to your mailbox without wondering what new threat is waiting. For weeks, I woke up at 3 a.m. and thought about statutes. That is not a noble sentence, but it is true. What kept me going was not anger. Anger burns too hot. It was the list on my desk. Rosa, Devin's mother, the young couple with the newborn, Evelyn, Tessa. People who had signed quietly because they needed someone else to stand visibly. And, if I am honest, Ellen, not in a mystical way, I just knew what she would have cared about. She would not have understood every ledger entry, but she would have understood Rosa's face on my porch. The final report was scheduled for presentation at a special members' meeting on December 5th. The board tried one last maneuver. 3 days before the meeting, Marlene emailed the community saying the report would be discussed in executive session first because it contained confidential legal and personnel matters. She said members would receive a summary after council review. Sheila replied within 11 minutes, copying the full board and the petition committee. My engagement letter requires presentation of findings to the membership body that authorized the review. The report can be redacted for account numbers and privileged legal advice, neither of which are necessary to the findings. I will attend the noticed meeting and present the member-facing report unless instructed in writing by the association's legal counsel to breach the engagement terms. Marlene did not cancel the meeting, but she did arrange the room differently. When I arrived, the board table was closer to the front wall, and the chairs were set in narrow rows with an aisle down the middle. It made the room feel like a courtroom or a church service. At the front, a projector screen hung crookedly. Sheila had her laptop connected already. She wore a red scarf. Rosa sat beside me. She had a folder of her own now. "You okay?" she asked. "Ask me in 2 hours." That's your answer for everything. It's a useful answer. The room filled beyond capacity again. People stood outside the open doors. December air moved in every time someone shifted. I could smell wet coats and coffee. Victor came in 5 minutes late. That was unusual. He always arrived early enough to look important. He walked down the aisle with Anna beside him. I had seen her in passing but never spoken to her. She was polished, blonde, and very still. Darren Cole entered behind them. No suit this time, just a black jacket and no smile. Marlene called the meeting to order. She started with a statement about volunteer service, difficult decisions, misinformation, and the need for civility. She said the board had always acted in the best interests of Maple Ridge. Then she said, "Before Ms. Park begins, I want to remind everyone that complex financial records can be easily misunderstood by laypeople. You don't need to see every line to appreciate the overall health of the association." The room reacted before I did. A sound moved through it. Not quite a gasp, not quite a laugh. More like 100 people hearing the same door unlock. Rosa leaned toward me and whispered. She said it too. I wrote the words down. Sheila stood. She did not warm up the room. She did not tell a story. She put the first slide on the screen, limited forensic review findings. Then she said, "I am going to be precise tonight. Precision matters here." For the next 40 minutes, she walked Maple Ridge through its own money. She showed dues revenue. She showed budgeted reserve contributions. She showed actual reserve deposits. Then she showed transfers out of reserves back into operating. A man behind me whispered, "They moved it back out?" Sheila paused. "Yes. In multiple months, reserve contributions were recorded, deposited, and then reversed or transferred back for operating cash flow. The membership reports did not clearly disclose that pattern." Victor stared at the screen. She showed Ridgeway payments by category: base management, compliance, violation processing, project coordination, consulting, administrative recovery. The bars climbed month by month. She showed contract overlap, where Ridgeway billed separately for work included in its base scope. She showed pool coordination fees paid during periods when the pool vendor had halted work for non-payment. She showed landscaping invoices paid in full, despite reduced service instructions. Then she showed a slide titled "Related Party Indicators." The room got very quiet. Sheila said, "Ridgeway Community Management is owned by Darren Cole. Darren Cole is the brother of Anna Hale, spouse of board treasurer Victor Hale. I found no approved board minutes documenting disclosure of this relationship before the contract vote. I found no conflict of interest form completed by Mr. Hale related to Ridgeway. I found evidence of pre-contract payments and startup reimbursements requiring legal review." Victor's head snapped up. "That's not accurate," he said. Sheila looked at him over her glasses. "Which sentence?" It was such a simple question. Which sentence? Victor opened his mouth, closed it. Marlene said, "Ms. Park, this is getting into personal matters." Sheila clicked to the next slide. It was not personal. It was a timeline. March 3rd, Ridgeway formed. March 14th, email from Darren Cole to Victor Hale referencing revised fee schedule and admin recovery. March 21st, board packet includes conflict disclosure form. March 24th, draft minutes note question regarding vendor relationship. March 24th, board approves Ridgeway contract 3-2. April 2nd, consulting advance paid. April 5th, Ridgeway virtual office expense paid. April 30th, first monthly invoice paid, June through August. Reserve transfers reversed, Ridgeway special fees paid. Each date appeared like a nail. Darren stood up. "That email is being taken out of context." Sheila said, "Please sit down. There will be time for questions." He did not sit. "You don't have authorization to show private business communications." Tessa stood from the side row. "It was in a board packet." Darren turned toward her. "You had no right to distribute that." Tessa's face went white, but she stayed standing. "I had a duty to keep records." That line did not sound like Tessa from 6 weeks earlier. It sounded like someone who had been afraid for too long and was angry about the time it cost her. Marlene called for order. Nobody listened. Victor leaned toward Sheila's laptop. "You're implying my wife took money." Sheila said, "I am stating that association funds moved through unsupported payments to a related party vendor and that certain startup costs appear connected to accounts associated with your household. Legal counsel should determine the appropriate remedy and referral." That's lawyer language for an accusation. It's accountant language for documentation. That was the moment the room fully turned. Not because people understood every accounting term. Most did not. But they understood Victor's face. He was no longer bored, amused, or condescending. His cheeks had darkened. One hand gripped the edge of the folding table hard enough that the metal leg squeaked. Marlene tried to regain control. "Everyone needs to remember that volunteers make difficult decisions. We relied on management." Evelyn's voice came from the third row. "You were warned about the relationship before the vote." Marlene looked at her. "Evelyn, don't start." Evelyn stood. She held a sheet of paper. "I have the draft minutes. I recorded the question. It was removed from the approved minutes." The room shifted again. Sheila clicked to the next slide. It showed 2 columns: draft minutes, approved minutes. In the draft, Secretary Hart asked whether Treasurer Hale should disclose family relationship between proposed management vendor and spouse. President Price stated disclosure not necessary because vendor owned separately. Treasurer Hale stated no conflict exists. In the approved minutes, management contract discussed, motion passed. You could hear the soda machine hum in the corner. Victor looked at Marlene. Marlene looked at the table. And Darren Cole, who had spent months signing threatening letters to people over weeds and ramps and basil, sat down very slowly. Sheila went on. The findings were not small. Unsupported or questionable Ridgeway charges totaled $74,380. Improper or inadequately documented reserve reversals totaled $112,000. Selective enforcement and fee allocation issues affected at least 26 homeowner accounts. Potential legal exposure included breach of fiduciary duty, voidable contract due to undisclosed conflict, improper fines, and possible misappropriation. Possible. That word mattered. Sheila used it every time. Then she presented recommendations. Suspend all pending lien actions and enforcement fees until reviewed. Freeze further payments to Ridgeway, except undisputed base transition costs. Terminate or void the Ridgeway contract subject to legal counsel review. Demand reimbursement of unsupported charges. Engage independent counsel to evaluate claims against board members in Ridgeway. Refer findings to appropriate law enforcement or regulatory authorities if counsel confirmed misappropriation. Hold recall vote for board officers who approved or concealed related party transactions. The recall word hung in the room. Marlene said, "This meeting was not noticed for recall." I stood. Correct. Tonight we can vote to direct the board to schedule a recall meeting and preserve records. Victor turned toward me. Of course. There he is. The man with the binder. He meant it as an insult. It did not land that way anymore. I walked to the front because someone asked me to speak into the microphone. The microphone smelled faintly like metal and coffee. Victor, I said, you told me once the members didn't need to see every line. He looked at me then. Not around me. Not through me. At me. His face changed in pieces. First irritation, then calculation, then something smaller. Recognition, maybe. He knew the line. He knew everyone else knew it now, too. I did not raise my voice. The problem is, every line was where the truth was hiding. Nobody clapped right away. I am glad they did not. The silence was better. Victor looked at the screen again. At the timeline. At Darren's name. At Anna's connection. At the payments. At the draft minutes beside the approved minutes. For the first time since I met him, he seemed to understand that the room no longer believed his confidence was evidence. He said, "You people don't understand what it takes to run this place." Rosa stood beside me. "We understand what it took from us." That was the line that broke him. His mouth open like he had a response ready, but nothing came out. Anna touched his arm. He shook her off without looking. Darren stared at the floor. Marlene whispered something to Nathan, but Nathan had already pushed his chair back from the board table as if distance could become a legal defense. The vote that night was not technically the final recall. But it was the end of the old board. By written ballot, the membership directed the board to preserve all records, suspend enforcement liens, engage independent counsel, terminate Ridgeway subject to counsel review, demand reimbursement of unsupported payments, and schedule a recall meeting. The count was 148 to 12. 12 people still voted with the board. There are always 12 people. The next 2 months were messy, but the direction did not change. Independent counsel came in. Not the board's usual collection attorney, a firm from the next county with no ties to Ridgeway. They reviewed Sheila's report, interviewed board members, and sent a demand letter to Ridgway, Darren Cole, Victor Hale, and Marlene Price. The demand letter sought $74,380 in unsupported or duplicative charges, repayment of improperly assessed enforcement fees, reimbursement of review costs, and preservation of electronic records. It also stated that the Ridgway contract was voidable due to undisclosed related party conflict and breach of fiduciary duties. Ridgway denied everything. Then counsel obtained full bank records. That is when denial became math. The full records showed 2 checks from Maple Ridge to Ridgway that were endorsed into an account ending in the same 4 digits as an account used for payments on a vehicle registered to Anna Hale. They showed expense reimbursements approved by Victor for Ridgway costs before invoices existed. They showed payments classified as reserve expenses that were not reserve expenses at all. They showed fine payments from homeowners deposited into operating and then paid out in bundles to Ridgway under administrative recovery. By then, the question was not whether the board had failed. The question was, who would pay back what, and who would be referred where. The recall meeting happened in February. It was cold enough that people wore coats inside until the heat caught up. Marlene sat at the board table with a stack of papers and no gavel. Victor did not sit at the table. He sat beside Anna in the first row. Darren was not there. Marlene made one last statement. She said she had served Maple Ridge with dedication. She said mistakes may have been made, but accusations had become personal. She said volunteers deserved grace. I believe in grace. I also believe grace is not a substitute for repayment. The recall vote removed Marlene, Victor, and Nathan. Tessa had already resigned and agreed to help transition records. Paul, the retired dentist who had voted against Ridgway, remained. 3 interim board members were elected from the floor, including Rosa. She tried to refuse. People shouted, "Rosa! Rosa!" She looked at me with panic in her eyes. I said, "You wanted to show us the money. This is what happens." She mouthed, "I hate you." Then she accepted. The new board's first actions were plain and beautiful. They suspended all pending fines related to disputed enforcement campaigns. They canceled my Basel fine. They canceled Rosa's lien process and refunded improper fees. They opened a secure online records folder for members. They hired a real management company after a competitive bid process with conflict disclosures read aloud at the meeting. They authorized counsel to finalize settlement demands. And they referred Sheila's report and the bank documentation to the county prosecutor's financial crimes unit. That last part was not theatrical. Nobody was dragged out in handcuffs from the clubhouse. Life is rarely that tidy. But a referral went in, with documents, timelines, bank records, and counsel's letter. Later, an investigator contacted me, then Rosa, then Evelyn, then Tessa. We answered questions. We gave documents we had already organized because by then, documentation had become our neighborhood's second language. The civil side moved faster. Ridgway's contract was voided. The company agreed, without admitting wrongdoing, to repay $58,000 and waive another $19,000 in claimed fees. Darren Cole signed the settlement. His signature looked smaller than it had on the lien letters. Victor and Marlene's insurer initially denied coverage for intentional acts, which created a whole new panic for them. Eventually, between bond coverage, settlement contributions, and direct repayment agreements, Maple Ridge recovered just over $83,000, plus the cancellation of improper charges. It was not every dollar. It never is. But it was enough to refill the reserve account to where it should have been and reopen the pool before summer. The special assessment was reduced from $1,850 to $300, then waived entirely for homeowners who had already paid improper enforcement fees. The new board published a reserve schedule that people could actually read. It had columns, dates, beginning balance, contributions, expenses. Ending balance. A strange thing happened after that. People stopped yelling about reserves. They did not love paying dues because nobody loves paying dues, but they could see where the money went. Funny how that works. Victor sold his house in August. I saw him once before he left. I was walking back from the mailbox. He was in his driveway, loading boxes into the back of a rented van. Anna was inside the garage. They did not look like people headed for a fresh start. They looked like people leaving before more neighbors came outside. He saw me and stopped. For a second, I thought he might say something. Apologize. Threaten me. Tell me I had ruined his life. People like Victor often need the last word, even when the last word is just another shovel of dirt. Instead, he looked toward my porch. The basil was still there, bigger now. I had moved it into a larger pot. He said, "Hope you're happy." I thought about Rose's lean notice, Evelyn's erased minutes, Tessa's fear. The pool gate chained all summer. The reserve money moved like a shell game. The sentence he had said because he thought no one in the room mattered enough to answer it. I could have said a lot. I said, "Take care, Victor." He got into the van. The criminal referral took longer. I am not going to pretend I know exactly how it will end, because cases like that move slowly and quietly. But I do know the treasurer faced formal investigation. I know subpoenas went out for bank records. I know Darren stopped operating Ridgeway under that name. I know Marlene hired her own attorney and stopped attending community events. And I know that for the first time in years, Maple Ridge's annual meeting included a treasurer's report, where members could ask about individual lines without being treated like trespassers. That mattered more than I expected. At the first normal annual meeting after all of it, Rosa sat at the board table with reading glasses perched on her head and a stack of printed financials in front of her. She was nervous. I could tell because she kept lining up the pages until the corners were perfect. A homeowner asked why the landscaping cost had changed. Rosa looked down at the report. Because the prior contract billed full common area service, but the actual service had been reduced, we rebid it. The new contract is lower and the scope is attached on page 12. The homeowner said, "Can we see the bids?" Rosa smiled. "Yes, they're in the folder. If you want paper copies, talk to me after." No one banged a gavel. No one threatened a lien. No one said the members did not need every line. After the meeting, the pool committee gave an update. The pump had been replaced. The leak had been fixed. The county inspection was scheduled. Rosa's grandson was there that night, sitting near the back with headphones around his neck. When Rosa announced the pool opening date, he looked at her like she had personally arranged summer. That was worth more than the binder. The pool reopened on a Saturday in June. I almost did not go. I am not a pool party person. Ellen was the pool party person. She could talk to anyone while balancing a paper plate and a lemonade. I usually found a chair in the shade and guarded the towels, but Rosa knocked on my door at 10 a.m. "You're coming," she said. "Good morning to you too." No excuses. I had several prepared. Save them for the next board packet. So I went. The water was clear. That sounds like a small thing, but after a year of looking at a chained gate and a faded sign, clear water felt like a public apology. Kids jumped in before their parents finished saying walk. Someone brought cookies. Someone else brought a speaker and played music too loud until Rosa gave them a board member look, which was impressive because she had only been a board member for 4 months. Her grandson entered the pool by the lift the new board had serviced. He lowered into the water slowly, face serious. Then he pushed away from the side and laughed. Rosa turned her face away for a second. I pretended not to see. Evelyn sat beside me under an umbrella. "Ellen would have liked this," she said. I looked at her. "I told you about Ellen?" Rosa did. Of course Rosa did. I watched the kids splash. I watched homeowners who had barely nodded months earlier talk like neighbors. I watched Paul from the board carry a trash bag around picking up cups because he said transparency did not exempt anyone from cleanup. Then I looked at the clubhouse window. For a second, I could see the reflection of the room the way it had been that night. Victor at the table, Marlene with the gavel, Darren with his laptop, me with my cracked binder, everyone afraid to be first. People ask sometimes whether it felt good to take them down. That is not the word I would use. It felt clean. Not happy. Not triumphant. Clean. Like opening a closet where something had been rotting and finally dragging it into the light. The smell does not vanish immediately. You still have to scrub. You still have to throw things out. But at least everyone stops pretending the house is fine. The final ironic detail came in the next year's budget packet. The new board included a line-by-line general ledger summary as an appendix. It was long, 27 pages. Most homeowners probably did not read all of it. That was fine. The point was not that every person had to inspect every line every month. The point was that they could. On the last page, under administrative expenses, there was a small entry for office supplies. $18.42. Binder, 3-inch, black. Rosa had bought it for the records room. She wrote a sticky note and put it on the cover before the first open records day. It said, "Every line. I kept my old binder too, the cracked one. It sits on a shelf in my office beside Ellen's spoon rest, which I moved from the kitchen after I almost broke it washing dishes. The binder is too full now. The rings don't close cleanly. Inside are the notices, the invoices, the petition, the Basil photos, Sheila's report, the recall ballot, and one printed screenshot of Victor's sentence from his email. You don't need to see every line. He was wrong about that. But more than that, he was wrong about why people ask. Most of us were not trying to be difficult. We were trying to understand why the pool was broken while the dues rose, why the flower beds died while landscaping invoices cleared, why a woman who had paid off her home could be threatened over a ramp, why a retired man with tomatoes on his porch could be told a basil plant was lien-worthy while tens of thousands of dollars moved through a company nobody had properly disclosed. We were not asking for every line because we loved paperwork. We were asking because every line was ours. And once Maple Ridge understood that, the whole thing changed. So if you live in a community like that, here's the only advice I will give. Do not start with rumors. Start with records. Ask politely. Ask in writing. Know the rules better than the people using them against you. Keep copies. Keep your voice level. Find one neighbor who is tired of being alone, then find another. Because the people who misuse power count on you feeling embarrassed for caring. Care anyway. And if they ever tell you that you do not need to see every line, that is usually the line you should start with.